I'm not sure how old I was when this happened. Somewhere between 4 and 7. My grandpa, I call him Aye, my dad's dad. I remembered him laying out a large rectangular sheet of bright red parchment. It laid across the oval dining table. Also on the table was a ruler for measurement and a pencil that was sharpened with a knife. You could see the directions of the woodcuts, inconsistently carved all the way up to the craggly tip of the graphite. I watched in curiosity and awe. My grandpa took the ruler and pencil and began to lightly draw straight lines, crisscrossing into a grid of varying sizes. At a distance, you couldn't make out the lines. However, I was seated on the dining chair, on my knees for added height. My tiny frame leaned over the table with my elbows propped, so I could rest my head on my hands. I wanted to see all the action up close. Next in the line of tools, a calligraphy brush and a container of jet black ink. My grandpa takes the brush into his hand, holding it vertically, perpendicular with the slightest angle. He dips the soft bristles of the brush into the ink, getting enough to cover it about halfway. Highly aware that the ink could drip, he takes the time to glide the edges of the brush to get rid of the excess ink. Carefully, he marked the red paper with black brushstrokes. Each character carefully ordered from top to bottom, from right to left. When the paper dried, the large red rectangle was put into a frame with a glass cover. The top 2 corners were decorated with festive, colorful ornaments, made of pink pom-poms and peacock feathers that looked like large eyeballs that stared back at you. I couldn't tell what it said when I was younger, but I remember thinking it was beautiful. When I got older, there was at least one character I did recognize. It was the character for our family name. This I knew because my grandpa taught me to write my name in Chinese. I didn't realize at the time what my Ye was doing exactly. I especially didn't realize that he was considered an expert in calligraphy for a shaman. The framed piece my grandpa had made was for the family altar. Amelia Tran Bencio had a similar experience as a kid, seeing the beautiful brushstrokes but not fully understanding what they meant or the stories behind them. She's a Chinese calligraphy artist based in Sydney, Australia, who has started her own journey learning about this tradition.
I wish there was more representation when I was a kid, saying that, oh, that person is Aussie and they're Chinese and they're Vietnamese. But I guess that's what makes my journey so unique, and being able to navigate through these 3 different identities was a challenge.
Amelia now runs a calligraphy business called Tranliography. She's not only learned a great deal about the artistry behind the brushstrokes and characters, but also about her own heritage and her place in this ancient practice. And she shares her story with us. Welcome, Amelia. Could you give me some background for people that don't know you, who you are and what you do?
So my name is Amelia. I am an Australian-born Chinese. My parents are Vietnamese-born Chinese refugees who came to Australia more than 40 years ago. And I am currently a Chinese calligraphy artist, and I run a coffee shop in the day.
Awesome. And what got you into calligraphy?
My dad actually got me into calligraphy, but it wasn't like a, hey, Dad, can you teach me how to write like you? It was a funny story because I discovered his diary. Didn't know what sort of diary it was, but it's this. It's literally just this, nothing written on it, and it's wrapped in aged A4 paper. And as a 20-something-year-old, I got really curious because I want to know what's inside. And the moment when I open the first page of the diary, it's just a drawing of a sad girl with a crucifix crying. And it's dated 18th of April, 1980. And I got curious, like, I want to know more. Why is there a drawing of this girl, as, for starters? And then I kept digging, and to my surprise, it was actually my dad documenting what was going on in Vietnam. Pretty much it's a family history of why we're in Australia, and to find out the atrocities of the war and what they had to encounter, like cannibalism, pirates raiding their boats. It's right in front of me. This is primary source, and I can't believe I'm just reading this with my own eyes. And also realizing that I can read, I can write, I can speak the language. And yeah, I just couldn't believe it. Like my dad he never really went into detail about why we're here. But then I just picked it up and I just confronted him about like, hey, what's this? Why do you have this tucked away in your room? And it's been like, almost 40 years. And he wasn't shy about it. He was very happy to share his stories because he left with 5 brothers, including themselves. There's 6 boys and 2 girls were left behind with my grandparents back in Vietnam. And I just was really honest with him. I go, how do you write without using whiteout? It's so neat. Your writing is legible. Teach me. It was just an admiration of my dad and how he was able to do that, while fleeing from, motherland and experiencing hardships.
Growing up, I couldn't read Chinese. My relationship with kind of reading and writing is very limited because supposedly my grandpa is probably like a calligrapher for like a shaman or something like that. So he was like the official calligrapher for them. He passed a couple of years ago, but like did his funeral, we burned his calligraphy brush with him as a send-off. And so he tried to teach me calligraphy when I was younger, but it never stuck. But I always admired, the thoughtful strokes that went into putting in the ink and making sure, because there's a certain way you have to write everything. And so you being able to do something like that is very amazing.
I just got goosebumps when you said your grandfather did calligraphy as well. So
I don't know if you have one at home or someone in your family that has like the family like altar.
Yeah.
Or something similar. So the one at my parents' house, the entire thing is written by my grandfather in his calligraphy. And something I think my father kind of picked up on it, but he wasn't like the biggest, like he was really big on penmanship and writing. He didn't really want to be part of this podcast. And in the background or the kind of type for the title of the show was actually written in my father's handwriting.
Stop it.
Yeah, so I had him at least do that. I was like, hey, Dad, can you write this for me? He's like, what for? And I was like, I just need it, please. So you said that you do like a coffee business on the side. So did you start out as a hobby and then you work this into a business?
Yes. So as a kid, I didn't really take a lot of pride in being able to read, write, and speak. Like millions of other Chinese kids, I was forced to go to Chinese school on Saturdays from 9 to 12. A lot of the kids during those times, they're either out playing soccer or they're at the shops or staying at home playing video games. But I had to go with my brother and spend 3 hours. And we learned Mandarin Chinese and I couldn't, we spoke Cantonese at home. My brother really struggled with understanding the teachers in the classroom, and during that time till now, like I struggled to accept my physical appearance because I didn't look like the conventional Chinese kid. I was a lot darker, I was chubby, and I just didn't fit into the identity of like a 10-year-old Chinese kid. So that was a constant struggle for me. And then I had to explain to people why, like help them connect the dots, like, oh, you can speak Cantonese, but you don't look like you can speak Cantonese. So for a while, I rejected my Chinese identity, and my journey was just put on the shelf because I didn't want to even face the fact that, you're Chinese, you're just a different shade of Chinese. So as a 10-year-old, I'm like, nah, I don't want to put myself through that. And then when I dove into the world of calligraphy, it was never intended to be something that could make money. So my parents never really, my mum in particular, she never really paid attention to what I was doing. Oh, she's just doing it for fun, whatever, until I scored my first gig in a shopping centre called Westfield. And that's when parents pay attention, like, oh, you're getting paid to write. That's pretty cool. And I'm like, yeah, it's in Westfield. And I was so proud. I was so proud of myself. And again, no one around me who I knew was doing this for a living. I have friends who do English calligraphy, but not Chinese. So it began from, just writing at home, uploading pieces that I wanted to share with social media, and then people recognizing that, hang on, there is value in what Amelia is bringing to the community. And it wasn't until I scored my first paid gig that I was like, hey, yes, this will pay bills, but this could also encourage other people to tap into their cultural roots and not necessarily picking up a brush pen or a pencil to start writing, but have those conversations with their family members. A lot of the stories that were passed on to you were done orally. So you can imagine my reaction when I found my dad's diary, and it was written encounters of what actually happened. Because every time I go back to the diary, my dad goes, oh, I forgot that happened. And I'm like, yeah, thank your 18-year-old self, because had you not written those details down, no one would know when we arrived. And they're like, oh yeah, around December, oh, the boat was TG something, but I don't remember. And then, so where I am today in my calligraphy career, I really, like the diary, I have to give a lot of credit for, because not only was I exposed to different ways to write one character, but it has formed a huge part of my calligraphy journey and to where I am now. And then now, becoming a parent, other parents will come to me saying, how do I encourage my kids to speak more Cantonese? How do I pick up writing? And I go, really, it starts with you. If your fluency in your language is limited to food, if it's limited to books, to music, then expose that to your kid. Forming that connection with their culture is something very personal. For example, there is a place called Cabramatta in Sydney where all the Vietnamese people congregate. Some people would tell me, oh, I'll bring my kids to have Vietnamese food. Yeah, you can do that part of exposing them to food from your culture, but forming that connection is something very personal. And it's not something that happens overnight. It could take weeks, years for them to form those connections. So if there are parents who are listening to this episode, do your best, really. If you just give all you got, whatever you can give your kid, then that's all you can do, but continue to be that resource for them, no matter what stage of life they're in.
I think there's a lot of also unconscious stuff that you pick up on, because I don't know how much Vietnamese culture was intertwined with your growing up, but I didn't have that realization until a lot later in adulthood, because growing up, no one told me, like, this is Chinese, this is Vietnamese, or whatever this is, because it's just like an amalgamation of just like everything. But my parents would be like, oh, let's go get pho on Sunday. It'd be like the time that we go out. But it never occurred to me. It was like, oh, wait, this isn't a Chinese thing.
Everything was just blended. Growing up, it was just a blend of Vietnamese and Chinese cultures. Like, our parents never went, this is Vietnamese, this is Cantonese. They were never like that. But are your parents Vietnamese born Chinese as well?
Yes. They are. So I saw your mention of, the confusion of having the Vietnamese last name and identifying as a Chinese person, because I didn't even know my last name was Vietnamese until college. Someone pointed it out because they came up to me and was like, are you Vietnamese? And I was like, no, I'm Chinese. And they're like, oh, were your parents born in Vietnam? I'm like, how'd you know? And they're like, oh, by your last name. It's like, yeah, there were a lot of people that, left Vietnam that were of Chinese descent, and that's that story. But I never had that realization or connection till then.
Right, yeah, and I think I have to explain that same narrative as well. I'm like, no, there are Chinese people who exist in Vietnam because the borders are really close. I have to tell them the borders are really close. This is China, this is Vietnam. Okay, so a lot of people moved from China to Vietnam, and now my husband is Filipino. I have to explain that to them. Tran, the Vietnamese, and Bencio is Filipino. And me growing up, I was teased for not looking like the conventional Chinese kid. I was mistaken as a Filipino for the longest time.
My younger sister, she's also a bit darker, so there's always people pointing out physical attributes that don't necessarily need to be called out, especially for kids, because then they're like, what do you mean I'm different, when you're trying to fit in?
That's right, and that's all you want to do when you're a kid. You just want to fit in. But now that me having a half Chinese, half Filipino kid, I want him to embrace all that. Yeah, go embrace your Filipino roots, go embrace your Chinese roots. I fully embrace it. Yes, legally, I am part Filipino. Adopted his surname. So it's a beautiful mess, and it's just, you eat mad food, Filipino, Vietnamese, Chinese, all in one mashup. So it's great.
Can you explain a bit about Sail to Survive?
Yeah, so that has been a recurring theme in my late 20s. So Sail to Survive is the English translation that I've given to what my dad has written in his diary. So the original text is 渡海求生. 渡海 means to literally cross the waters. 求生 is to survive, like to beg for survival. That is also a recurring theme in the diary. And I wanted to sort of immortalize my dad and his brother's journey, because I don't know about you, Christina, because like a lot of the stories that we hear, our parents like, oh yeah, this happened, this person died. It's very casual.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Very casual. They just brush it off. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you broke the cycle by risking your lives, and you came to a new country where you have to learn the language, face racism, whatever, and they just talk about it so casually. They don't celebrate that. And to me, that's worth celebrating. I want people in our family, the descendants, my younger cousins, to know, to learn our family history. But if we're going to talk about it, let's make it an event. And I teamed up with my very good friend, and she's Cambodian. So we're talking, and we're like, hey, Veronica, did you know that we have so much in common? Like, our parents are refugees, and they broke cycles by moving to another country and gave us life there. And you're like, you know what? You're right. And so we set up an event, a one-day free event called Sail to Survive. And it was just pretty much like a workshop where we had a panel, and it was just me and her as my co-host, and we had two special guests, which were our cousins. So she brought a cousin, and then I brought my cousin. My cousin was actually a toddler on the boat with my dad. So he had those first-hand experiences that he could share with us on the night. And it was pretty much encouraging children of immigrant parents to have those conversations with their parents at home or with their elders or whatever. And for them, it was pretty much like a validation for what they experienced as well, as children of immigrant parents, how our parents came to Australia and they just keep their heads down and just survive, just work on surviving, like keep the lights on, provide food on the table. And anything that involved talking about their emotions or their lived experiences, or like, oh, no, you don't talk about that. I didn't realize this until I was planning the event with my friend, and I was like, did you realize that my dad was journaling and he's already practicing mindfulness And I'm like, explain so much why my dad is so happy to share these horrible experiences so openly with me. Because I know that a lot of, even my dad has told me his friends, when they talk about it, they just shut down, like, oh, so long ago, why you bring it up? You know, life's good now. But
No, that's
then,
exactly my family too. And it's interesting because I think going back to kind of like the psychology of it, where like if you're fleeing a country, all you can do is be on survival mode. So like there's no allotment for time to be with your emotions or, feel what you've been dealing with.
yes, that's right. You're so right. And it really opened up the minds of the attendants on the night. You know, even having like one-on-one conversations with them during the break and after the event. They're like, thank you so much for having this night, because yes, we develop a compassion for our parents when we're older, because when we were little, we were watching our parents grow up as well, you know. They did the best to provide us with the best, with the resources that they had at the time. And, and then we even joked about it, like, oh, let's do a second event where the tables are turned, put our parents on the panel and just fire them with questions. But Sail to Survive has really stuck with me, and it will stick with me for as long as I am alive, because it's true. And it's not only applicable in the context of our parents fleeing to another country, but in our lives. And an interesting thing that we also discussed on the night was a lot of the struggles that our parents dealt with, they're displayed externally. Like, they're tired and they come home, they're like, oh, I'm tired, I worked 10 hours here at the restaurant, whatever. But a lot of our struggles are internal. You can't see them. So don't know if you can relate to this, Christina, but even coming home from school saying, I'm so tired.
Tired.
And my parents are like, you have nothing to complain about. Why are you tired? You go to school, blah, blah, blah. And you hear like a succinct, oh, yeah, that was me when I was a kid. So that was another interesting finding that we discovered. You know, a lot of our experiences, our lived experiences, are internal. And a lot of times as kids, our parents didn't really get the validation that we needed. Like, yeah, like,
No.
am I gaslighting myself? Am I really tired? You know, it's just something that we observed, and my parents still do this as well. And they're still learning, oh, yeah, that's true. You go to school, you have your own challenges. We also have our set of challenges. And it's almost like boastful, our parents, the way that they talked about their challenges. Oh, you don't know what it's like. I worked 3 jobs. You get to go to school. You didn't have to work. It's almost like they're so proud of it. I was like, this is not normal,
Yeah.
Mom and Dad.
Well, I guess they kind of use it as like an excuse to invalidate how we're feeling, because like you said, it's an internal struggle where we're like, yeah, we're tired, but like, should you be that tired? And, you're a kid, you're trying to sleep in on a Saturday and your parents are just cleaning everything, brushing things up. And you're like, why are you sleeping in? There's things to do.
Always something to do. And when you offer help to your parents, like, do you need help? Like, nah, don't need help. And then you turn around, they're like, when I die, no one's gonna help me.
Or, they call you lazy, things like that. So how does your dad feel about you working on all of this?
My dad, he's a very open-minded person. So I actually featured a one-on-one interview, like a 2-minute clip on the night when we had Sail to Survive. And he was very shy at first, like, I don't have a script. I'm like, you don't need a script. I'm like, when you tell me stories, you don't have a script, no? Our dad's generation, they never did stuff like this. Like, hey, do you want to sit down and do a podcast where we talk about like our feelings? Or like, oh, do you want to do a video where like I just ask you questions? And to them, it's very new as well.
Well, it puts them in kind of like a position of vulnerability, right? That they're not used to. Because like, I don't know about you, but my dad's not as open. And so he usually keeps to himself and like, I don't know, he prefers it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's also how we present it to them as well. Like how I present to my dad was very simple, and I said, "Look, your experiences could help someone out there who have parents who don't have really good relationships with their kids, and it all comes down to communication. Communication is not something that we are born with. It's a skill that you have to earn and you learn to polish over time. So I said, look, just pretend you're talking to me, but it's going to be a little bit more structured. So in the 2-minute excerpt, it was me asking him, did you realize that you journaling at the time was has allowed you to open up and share your experiences? And he said, yeah. And you can see that moment of realization for him, saying, oh, yeah, maybe that's why I am so happy to share about my stories. And it's kind of cute watching them, realizing. And he has, I think he's proud. Like, he's never told me, I'm proud of you, Amelia. Thanks for this opportunity. But you will hear them turn around and they talk about it to their friends. Like, oh, Amelia did this, and, she started typing out like my excerpt, blah, 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 blah. And he's been supportive, I'm sure, especially in my calligraphy journey. I would sometimes go back to my dad saying, hey, what's that Chinese idiom that you taught me? How do you write this again? And it sort of acts as a distraction for them as well, because my dad, he runs a restaurant and we've been running it for almost 25 years. So it's so easy to get caught up in this one little area of your life where it's just work, work, work. And having little distractions like this help them find joy in the presence and being able to have a laugh at, your experiences. Oh, yeah, a boat was raided by pirates. Oh, yeah, like they stole gold and whatnot, and babies not having water or formula. It's like dark humor, and they're able to joke about it. And I think it's important, using humor as a coping mechanism for them as well. And I'm like, that's why when you talk about death, you talk about it so casually. Because for us, it's like, personally, I haven't experienced that many deaths in my life. But for my parents to experience that in 18 months, dozens of people, hundreds of people dying, I think at the end of the day, when I talk about, Cell to Survive or Chinese calligraphy with my dad, I think I want him to know that, I am grateful. I'm really grateful for what we have, the life that I have right now. But also, there were times when I didn't feel loved, or like I wasn't shown loved in the way that I will be shown now, through saying the words like, oh, I love you, but then learning that there are different types of love languages as well. So
yeah, like acts of service.
Yeah, that's a big one. And just have something to remember. You really have one life, so why not make the most of it and use this life? And then I know that a lot of people, when they experience like a passing in their family, or it's like their parent, a really common thing that they've brought up is, I wished I asked my parent more about this. I wish I knew more about their life. I really hope that he's happy with what I'm trying to do to preserve this important part of our family history and to give him more credit. It's mind-blowing to me. And yeah, definitely need to preserve that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I'm going to go back a little bit, but how was navigating your identity growing up? Because so you're Australian, you have Cantonese, there's Vietnamese, and then, now you're thrown in with Filipino culture. Is that something that you kind of had to come to terms with? Because you said earlier on in childhood, you kind of rejected it.
Now, as a 30-year-old, I am very thankful for this mashup of cultures that I'm a part of. As a kid, they're either like one big blend of cultures, like being Australian, being Chinese, being Vietnamese. It was never like a time when I was like, yeah, I am all this and I'm proud of it. That wasn't the case. And now that I'm starting to embrace it more because I am a parent, I think I try my best to present it in very creative ways. So making videos where my kid will watch when he's older. Whereas I wish there was more representation when I was a kid, saying that, oh, that person is Aussie and they're Chinese and they're Vietnamese. But I guess that's what makes my journey so unique, and being able to navigate through these 3 different identities was a challenge, because there were days where I bring something smelly to school. Some people will think it's smelly, like pork and chives dumpling. And kids were like, oh, what are you eating? I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to eat that for lunch. I'm just going to go to the canteen and buy a meat pie, like all the other kids, because I just want to fit in, you know. But now, the kids who made fun of, like, my lunchbox, they're like, oh, I love dumpling. I love yum cha. I'm like, yo, you weren't like that when I was a kid. So, yeah, and I always have this theme in my head where I'm like, there is only one of you and you are limited edition. No one can ever replicate who you are and what you do, so just stick with it.
Yeah, I agree that, you know, our experiences are very specific to us and that we shouldn't be ashamed of who we are as individuals.
Yeah, and I am so proud to be able to have Cantonese food, and I'll have Vietnamese food. Occasionally I have pub food. And I'm always aware that my kid might be 2 years old, but he's watching me. He's watching my every move, how I present myself, how I speak to other people. And then I'm thinking back, as a kid, I was watching my parents grow up as well. Flawed, but great.
That was my conversation with Amelia Tran Bencio, a Chinese calligraphy artist based in Sydney, Australia. You can find out more about her calligraphy work, Tranliography, at tranliography.com. That's TRANLIAGRAPHY.com. For more information on this episode and the series, head to pbsreno.org/Refugee's Daughter. And a special thank you to Amelia for joining the show. Subscribe to Refugee's Daughter wherever you listen to podcasts and give the show a rating and review. I'm Christina Lee, and thanks for listening. This episode was written by Christina Lee with production help from Divergent Point Media. Refugee's Daughter is a presentation of PBS Reno.